Hello, I'm Steve.
And I'm Kelly.
And we're with Stand Up Arkansas, and we're doing our voter guide breakdown. And we're going to talk about the Chief Justice to the Arkansas State Supreme Court. And that is between Justice Karen Baker and Justice Rhonda Wood.
Yep.
Both of them are already sitting on the Supreme Court, which is going to create a vacancy that then the governor is going to get to appoint someone. And that's important because the governor is stacking the court.
Right.
Like every time we turn around, she's appointing somebody else to the court. And the people she's appointing are specifically against marijuana. They're specifically against the women's right to choose. And they're stacking to create decisions.
And can we talk a little bit about the purpose of the Supreme Court for a minute and how it's really not supposed to be political?
They can't even run as a Democrat or Republican. It is a nonpartisan position. We have three branches of government. The executive branch, which would be the governor, our agencies, the departments, the people who fall directly under the governor. And then we have the legislative branch, which would be the General Assembly. That's the people running for Senate or House of Representatives at the state level. And then judicial would be our prosecuting attorneys, our judges, our Supreme Court. And it is how we interpret and enforce the laws that the General Assembly passed that the executive branch signed off on.
And those three branches of government really hold each other accountable.
Yes.
Should. Plus, in Arkansas, the fourth branch, which is the people.
Because we have direct democracy in
So there
Arkansas.
should be accountability here because things are different in Arkansas and we don't really have that.
And some of the things that's happened over the last couple of years, the citizens of Arkansas normally couldn't tell you who's sitting on the Supreme Court. But we're watching every decision that comes down because it's become so political. And we're seeing the governor pushing her agenda through the judicial branch. And we've had things happen like specific black and white written laws in the Constitution. And it has gone before this Supreme Court. And they say, even though it says that, it doesn't mean that, which really got around some laws that the General Assembly twisted around the emergency clause and some different things. And then we had the Secretary of State, which is over here on the executive branch with the governor. They were donating money and creating organizations to defeat getting reproductive rights on the ballot.
And education.
But I want to talk about reproductive rights in particular because reproductive rights got the necessary number of signatures
over
that were needed.
100,000.
And there is no handbook. There are no rules. We're going off of an old handbook from a previous legislature, but the administrative rules of how you do it, there's not a handbook that's
It's
current.
just figuring it out as we go.
And the Secretary of State created his own rule. It's not a rule that was made in the Constitution. It's not
Or a rule that anyone knew about ahead of time.
This one was like a little, like an interpretation of a rule. But regardless, it's a rule that was set by an agency. It wasn't set by our legislators. It wasn't set by a court. You can't make a rule that checks the people of Arkansas, no matter what rule you set, if it's not through a law or through a court. They made this rule that said you had to have this paperwork turned in or whatever, which is clearly a violation of the constitutional rights to be on the ballot. And that was Thurston. And it went before the Supreme Court, and they had stacked the Supreme Court with justices that literally would vote against that, even though it was wrong. And Rhonda Woods was on one side to vote with the governor, with voting down, getting that on the ballot. And Karen Baker wrote the dissent and said, you're wrong. This is not what was supposed to happen. And that's just one example. But there have been,
she stood up for openly for upholding being able to put abortion on the ballot, right?
And I'm not saying that she is for reproductive rights. Right. It's the same thing we tell people when they're signing the petition. This doesn't mean that you're for it or against it. It just means that you think that the people should have a right to vote on it. And regardless of what the position was procedurally, she says, you can't do what you're doing. They brought politics into it. And then there's another case just literally right as a shadow of that one, where it was Freedom of Information Act stuff.
Transparency.
It was transparency within the court in this case. And you had judges that were hiding things from the public. And guess who's on one side? Rhonda Woods. And Karen Baker, Judge Baker, literally referred them for disciplinary action for not being transparent. I believe very firmly that we need judges that are looking out for the rights of the people and looking out for what the Constitution says. And Karen Baker so far has shown us that she's looking out for people and not for politics. So for that, she has my solid endorsement.
As does she mine. Plus,
we have a connection.
We have a connection because her daughter-in-law, Caroline,
whose husband ran for judge.
Ran for judge in Conway. We visited with them a while ago, and her daughter helped us with Grace. She babysat for Grace whenever Grace was little. She was her driver. Picked her up from school and stuff while I was working.
Yeah, a 13-year-old.
I do personally know her. I trusted Caroline with my child.
Yes,
and that's her family. And though I don't personally have a relationship with her, I do know her family.
And her son is a very upright, great guy. And they've got a beautiful child as well. So, y'all, the Supreme Court and who we vote for on this is very important.
This is important. Of all of the races, I can't even begin to say this one really
is probably the most important.
Matters.
Over the next 2 or 3 years, all of the laws in Arkansas are going to be challenged. They're challenging them down on the quorum court level, and they're trying to change things around our library systems, around our public education, around how we fund our health care, about what services we get. And they're challenging these things, and also about transgender rights and LGBTQ rights and birth control and reproductive rights. All of these things that really are about autonomy of the human soul, personhood, those are being challenged. And they're getting challenged up to the Supreme Court. We need a Chief Justice that is going to stand on purpose for the people of Arkansas.
And uphold the law.
And uphold the law and the spirit of the law. So y'all, get out there, spread the word. Let's get Karen Baker elected.